Election night in America, and the polls have closed in Oklahoma. Good evening once again from the Oklahomans Video Studio. I'm Dave Morris, providing you some election night coverage from our downtown studios here in Oklahoma City. Thanks so much for joining us. The polls opened at 7 a.m., they closed at 7 p.m., and in between, Oklahomans across the state cast their ballots for the president, for congressional races, for 7 state questions. And a lot of questions from how they voted today will be answered throughout tonight as the results come in. We will have live updates here on newsok.com, and if you happen to be downtown in Oklahoma City, on our big screen at Sheridan and Robinson as well. Follow along live on our website at newsok.com or watch on demand. Let me introduce you to the cast of characters we have in studio currently, and that will be shuffling throughout the night. We'll get to Brian Dean on the phone in just a second from the State Election Board, and Chris Castile via Skype from Washington, D.C. But first, to my right here from the Oklahoman, we have Ben Felder and Rick Green. Gentlemen, thanks so much for your time tonight. Looking forward to your perspective and analysis.
Yeah, good evening.
And from Sooner Poll, ladies and gentlemen, Bill Shapard joining us once again to help us out to dissect the polls and the numbers. Sir, great to see you again.
Thanks.
Good looking bow tie.
It's purple for a reason.
He's a smart man. He's Bill Shapard with Sooner Poll. We'll bring these gentlemen back in just a second. As I mentioned, Brian Dean is on the phone. He's with the State Election Board. Sir, how are you?
Tired, but we're going to make it.
You guys ramped up. You guys have done a really good job on your Twitter account, keeping Oklahomans informed, not just the media, but Oklahomans informed on how to vote, where to vote, and then kind of what's going on behind the scenes. But let me back up and just say, Brian, how did it go today?
You know, surprisingly smooth, given how many folks went out and cast ballots today. We had record numbers participate for early voting and voting by mail, so you know, we were really expecting a pretty healthy turnout today, and I do think we got that. But, you know, we have had some long lines in places, and we've tried to shift some resources around to deal with that as we can. But overall, you know, this is nothing more than we generally get from a pretty busy election. So I've been pretty pleased. It's gone fairly smoothly.
Any reports of problems with machines or ballots anywhere across the board?
We've had some technical issues. That happens in every election. We have over 1,000 polling places, almost 2,000 polling places. So if you know you get 2,000 of any type of machine up and running for an entire day, you're going to have some of them go down. And so we try to get those fixed as quickly as possible. And if it's not something we can get a quick fix on, we'll run a replacement machine out there. And we have procedures in place for ballots to be placed in an emergency bin, and then they get scanned through. So, but again, that's nothing unusual, and we haven't had any sort of widespread issues or problems.
Chatting on the phone with Brian Dean from the Oklahoma Election Board. Brian, as I mentioned, the polls closed. They closed at 7 p.m. Do you have any way of knowing, are there people still in line anywhere?
We do believe there are still people in line. Anybody who is in line at 7 p.m. will get to vote. So we know there have been lines at a lot of precincts, and so anybody who made that line by 7 p.m., they're going to keep the polls open until those folks make it through. So we probably do still have some folks in line in places, and you know, that might delay how quickly we get some results in from those precincts. But we want to make sure everybody who you know can possibly get their ballot counted does so. So we're gonna stay open until every one of those people gets through the line.
And you touched on this on one of your earlier answers today. We saw very high early voter turnout. Was that surprising? And then from what you've seen and heard today, were you surprised at today's turnout?
Well, you know, it's not surprising to see high turnout for a presidential race, but it's not just that we broke records with the numbers this year. We really shattered them. Our previous record for the most early votes we'd ever had was 114,000 early voters in 2008. We had 153,000 and change this year, and for mail voting, we've had over 103,000 ballots returned. That number may go up slightly still as they've because any that arrived today they will get counted in there. But the previous record on that was 74,000, so we're 40,000 above, 30,000 above on each of those categories, and I mean, those are huge margins when you look at what we've had in previous elections. So it was pretty surprising to just have numbers that high. As far as turnout today goes, everything's anecdotal, and we really won't know anything until we start getting results in and seeing. Every big election, we feel like we see good turnout, but you just don't know with the numbers until you really start counting them.
And you guys ramped up efforts behind the scene. I saw that you employed roughly 1,000 extra workers today at the polls.
We did. Every county that asked for additional poll workers, we paid for them. In addition to that 1,000 we paid for, some of the counties hired some more with their own budgets as well. So we had a lot of extra poll workers out there. And we really try to be flexible. And if we see a particular precinct that's having issues with long lines, we'll send people out to try to deal with that. I know we had one in Osage County earlier. We actually sent some additional poll book and some more polling booths in a sheriff's car with lights and sirens going to get them out there quick. So we've tried to do that as we can throughout the day. And I know people are frustrated with the lines, but we really want to see these as a positive, because this is what good voter participation looks like. In Oklahoma, we had, frankly, abysmal turnout in 2014 for the gubernatorial election, and so we were really encouraged to see more people getting their voice heard and going out and getting their ballots cast. And this is what that looks like, and that's going to include some lines.
As you can see there, we're chatting with Brian Dean from the Oklahoma State Election Board. Brian, I have a question for you, and this may not be a question you can answer, but is there any way of knowing, as the results come in and are crunched over the next few days, how many ballots may have been cast that were filled out down ballot, but people didn't vote for a presidential candidate?
That's really going to be interesting to see, and we do have a way of monitoring that. We record those as what we call undervotes, where somebody casts a ballot but leaves it blank in a specific race, and typically the presidential race is going to get more votes than any other race on the ballot. But we'll have to see if some of the political circumstances this year, if we don't see more undervotes this year than we have in the past. But I'm going to be kind of looking out for that myself, because I am a bit curious.
Brian, Rick Green, as I mentioned, he's on the desk here joining us here in the Oklahomans video studio. Rick, I'll toss it to you. I believe you have a question for Brian.
Yeah, Brian, can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
Great. What were the length of some of the lines here in the metro area? Were some of the busier polling places up to an hour or more, or less than that?
We did have some, I think, that were over an hour. Once we started, if we saw any getting to 2 hours or more, we really tried to shift some resources to those. And I know there were some people reporting lines of 2 hours or more. And I don't know if that was just in particular portions of the day or all day, but I don't think most people had to wait that long. I think there were just some precincts here and there that were especially busy, but I think an hour was not too uncommon across the state for sure.
Were there any complaints of people saying, well, there's electioneering going on at the polling place, or any inappropriate behavior or anything like that you heard about?
Again, we get a few of those every election, but nothing really out of the ordinary. I mean, sometimes, the law does not allow any sort of electioneering, and that would include wearing campaign hats and shirts and buttons and things like that. And there are always people who don't realize that that's not allowed, and so they wear them in. And poll workers will generally ask them to remove those or turn them inside out if it's a T-shirt. And I know we've had some of those cases today, but again, we see that typically in every election, and so. We try to get everybody through, and if we have problems like that, just deal with them as they crop up.
Very good. Brian Dean, what's the rest of the night look like for you?
Well, we are just going to have to make sure every precinct gets in and every vote gets counted. And again, with some of those folks still waiting in lines, who got there by 7, it may delay results. We pride ourselves on typically getting pretty quick results and getting getting very accurate results on our website. And oftentimes we have most of our precincts in by 9:30 or 10. That may be a little later tonight. We'll see how that goes. But if a lot of those precincts are delayed, then it may delay how quickly we can get those results up on our website. But I'm just really looking forward to start seeing those numbers pop up and making sure we get all this stuff counted and done.
He joins us every big election night. He's Brian Dean from the Oklahoma State Election Board. Sir, as always, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
We will. Brian mentioned the polls. We spoke with various people, Oklahomans, who hit the polls today to see who they were voting for, what their thoughts were, what they were looking forward to, both today at the polls and then beyond. And I believe we have that video package, guys, if you want to roll that.
We need a change. We don't need the same old thing that we've been doing, and Hillary is a liar.
Sure, I'm voting for Hillary Clinton. Yeah, the fact that she's a woman I think is very important, but I think she's also just very well qualified.
Voted for Trump. The deficit, I feel like he has a better understanding of the deficit, and some of my other concerns were skyrocketing health costs, immigration. Those are some of the most important things I felt that he could handle.
It's huge. It's just huge. I didn't really spend my life waiting for this moment, but as a mother of two daughters who are 20 and 17, although the 17-year-old's very unhappy she's not voting today, this means the world to me. It means the world has changed.
Obamacare, I don't care for it. I think a lot of my families and relatives are suffering for that. High costs. So it's not getting anywhere. So yes, I'm ready for a change.
I'm excited that our generation gets to see the first black president and potentially the first female president.
I think it sends a really strong message to young girls over the country that you can do whatever you want.
We're live from the Oklahomans video studio tonight. As we mentioned, the polls in Oklahoma closed at 7 p.m. We'll bring in Chris Castile via Skype right now. And Chris, we're starting to see some states being declared. In fact, Hillary Clinton is said to win Delaware, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Massachusetts, Illinois, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. This is CNN's projection based on exit polls. Donald Trump will win West Virginia, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Oklahoma. Chris, any surprises there?
No, none at all. Yeah, we're still waiting on the biggies: Florida, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio. So could be an early night. And when I first came over here to join this conversation, Clinton was up in Florida. So if that one goes, it's hard to see Trump pulling it out tonight.
In Florida could be interesting because I think I saw something yesterday where half of the registered voters voted early there.
I know. It's just an amazing early vote in so many places. And I wanted to ask Brian Dean, what he had heard anecdotally about the Oklahomans showing up, because, that really in the last two presidential elections, turnout in Oklahoma has been down, even though, you had this historic election in 2008 with Barack Obama, then Senator Barack Obama against John McCain. And fewer people voted in that than they did in 2004 for Kerry and Bush. So, I'm wondering, how many of these people just wanted to avoid the long lines of Tuesday, or who, and how many were driven out by some race that they really wanted to vote for, whether it was presidential, state questions, whatever it might be. Obviously, presidential race is not competitive in Oklahoma. The only question, the only thing we're kind of watching right now is whether Clinton can win a county, because no Democrat has won a county in Oklahoma since Al Gore in 2000. No Democrat has carried the state since Lyndon Johnson in '64. Wasn't a lot of suspense. So, just be interesting to see. But, ultimately, at the end of the night, what total turnout is compared to 2012.
Chris, how many presidential election nights have you covered now?
Since '88.
Since '88. So what did you spend today doing?
Really just getting ready for tonight. Writing up some of what I was working on, and watching the news shows. There's really not much you can do on a Tuesday. I was watching our great reporters who are out in Oklahoma City, watching their tweets and watching their video interviews come in. Darla Slipke, Juliana Keeping, Silas Allen, Ben Felder. They did their usual great job of getting out there and getting people were reluctant to talk to them. Apparently, I think it was Juliana said 4 out of 5 ran away from her. But
and that's right. And Darla, you retweeted some of their tweets. Darla Slipke, as you mentioned, as you were dropping names there of our quality reporters. You mentioned Darla's tweet talking about how one lady was too embarrassed to admit who she had voted for.
Yeah, I think some in the package that you just showed, we're happy with their votes, proud of their, happy with their choice, proud of voting for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. But I think clearly, I think Juliana tweeted that she got a lot of, lesser of two evil responses.
Chris, what would surprise you tonight?
I think it would surprise me if Republicans, had kept a firm grip on the Senate. I think either the Democrats are gonna take it over by 1 or 2 seats, or it's gonna wind up in a tie. It would surprise me if Republicans retain control of the U.S. Senate.
Chris, as we mentioned earlier, we have Ben Felder and Rick Green on set. I believe Rick has a question for you.
Chris, would it surprise you if there was a county in Oklahoma that went for Hillary Clinton tonight?
I think so. It would probably surprise me, Rick. I think, so much of Oklahoma is Donald Trump's demographic, the high school, white high school education. And even in areas like Oklahoma County, where we're much more educated, much more diverse. I think you have, like, say, in Edmond, you have people who just cannot bring themselves to vote for Hillary Clinton. Cleveland County is definitely a possibility, but you still have that more part of Cleveland County. I mean, I think Norman could go for Hillary. It's hard. It takes a lot of effort to kind of separate out the vote results in the cities from the counties themselves. Like, there's a chance Oklahoma City could vote for Hillary Clinton, but it'll take some effort to parse that out. But so because of those things, Rick, that demographic, which I think also is kind of prevalent more, that it would be hard for her. That it was Oklahoma County. When I talked to Democrats at the Democratic National Convention in Philly a few weeks ago, they said their best shots were Oklahoma County and Cleveland County. And it's important to say that the president didn't get 40% in either of them in 2012. So that's kind of a tall order.
Is there a little bit of a change afoot? We see that Texas, because of demographics, is trending a little bit more on the Democratic side, but it's still Republican. Do you see Oklahoma eventually going in that direction as well?
Not the state, not any time in the near future, but I think at least in central Oklahoma, Tulsa is just so reliably red. No matter how much change there has been in Oklahoma City, we really haven't seen it in Tulsa. So, but I do think central Oklahoma will become a lot more of a battleground in 2018, and all those statewide races you guys are going to cover there. It should be really interesting. Governor Mary Fallin barely won re-election in Oklahoma County in 2014.
Chatting via Skype with Chris Castile, joining us from Washington, D.C. His comment there, a little foreshadowing we'll get to in just a second. Chris, I'm going to bring in Bill Shafford from Sooner Poll. He has a question for you. And ladies and gentlemen, as you see the handsome gentleman over there, over his shoulder, we're starting to get some early results there. But Bill, you had a question for Chris.
Yeah, Chris, the early absentee ballots and early voting are showing 67% for Donald Trump. Typically, as we just heard Brian Dean talk about, how the increase in early voting here compared to prior years, but yet Democrats usually are better at getting their vote out than Republicans. Do you think this is going to carry over as we begin to see the results come in for voting today? Do you think that he can maintain a 67% advantage?
I do. I think the last Democrat to get more than 34% was Al Gore. So that means John Kerry and President Obama twice got 34% or less. So, if you throw in Gary Johnson, I don't know, we'll know later tonight what impact he'll have on it. But I mean, it's not too far off the norm, right? For the Democrat to get only 33%.
Chatting via Skype.
The recent norm, the last three elections, presidential elections.
Chris Castile via Skype from Washington, D.C. He mentioned Al Gore, the last Democratic presidential nominee to win a county in Oklahoma. That was among the numerous facts you provided in Sunday's editions of the Oklahoman. Chris, thank you for that information.
You're welcome.
And in today's editions of the Oklahoman, our Ben Felder provided 16 storylines to follow tonight. And Ben, I'll bring you in at this point. What are some of the storylines you're following tonight?
Well, one of them was a look at do Dems have a chance with any counties in Oklahoma? And I think Chris is right. It's kind of a long shot, but Oklahoma County and Cleveland County would be it. It's definitely trending more Democratic in Oklahoma County when you look at recent races. I think the challenge for Democrats right now is do you have other candidates on the ballot that are going to drive up that Democratic vote? Do you have a strong enough congressional candidate for the 5th District, which includes Oklahoma County? The one thing that makes me think that it might be a little interesting, I don't think it'll be enough to tip it over, but you do have Democrats that have some pretty competitive urban seats right now in South Oklahoma City and Northwest Oklahoma City. Some strong Democratic candidates that I think have done a really good get out the vote campaign. So it's a chance that they may drive up those numbers a little bit more if some of those voters are going to go along and vote for Clinton. Some of those seats, they're going to have to rely on Democratic State House votes that are also voting for Trump. So it's yet to be seen there, but I think we're trending that direction, but I still think it's kind of a long shot. I think turnout's an important question. As Brian was mentioning at the top of the program, turnout's been pretty low as of late here in Oklahoma. New records and early and absentee ballots being submitted is a good sign, but are those traditional voters that are just moving more towards early voting, especially as the state has made that more of a priority, or does that show more people entering the electorate? For me, I'm also looking at state and House seats. I think Republicans are really eyeing a handful of seats in Democratic control in the House that are in eastern Oklahoma. Seats that are open, so there's not an incumbent on the ballot. You do have Republican and Democratic candidates, but in counties where Trump did very well in the primary, is expected to do very well tonight or today. So I think Republicans are looking to expand their rural resume, so to speak. And on the flip side, Democrats are hoping to maybe pick up a few urban seats that have been in Republican control for quite a while, maybe banking on some changing demographics in Oklahoma City.
Those are among the 16 storylines Ben Felder outlined in Tuesday's editions of the Oklahoman. And Rick, you've been integral in this interview tonight, asking some questions. What are some of the storylines you're following tonight?
Well, I'm really interested in the state questions. It's interesting that the presidential race gets all the attention and drives people to the polls, but some of these questions like the penny sales tax affects people where they live when they go to the checkout line in the grocery store, or being able to buy a bottle of wine along with dinner at the grocery store. So that's, I think, going to affect people more ultimately than some of the legislative races or other parts of the ticket. So it'd be interesting to see how those go. There's been a lot of money spent on some of these state questions, and a lot of it was spent toward the end of the campaign season. So it's a lot of guesswork on how that's going to break out tonight. So I'll be looking at that.
Bill, how much does that money change an issue like a state question when the money comes in towards the end of the campaign season?
Well, we know money is the mother's milk of politics, and so even for state questions, it can matter a lot, and that's where even endorsements matter a lot, because people are heavily influenced by when they don't know the subject matter, when they're looking at a state question and going, I really don't know how I feel about this. Money, ads on television, endorsements, all of those things will have a much more greater influence.
They're watching the World Series last week. Suddenly they see state question, whatever it is, continually pop up. Something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, they know that that's something that's going to be on the ballot when they get there, and they need to learn something about it. And they will rely on what other people say. And that's the reason why these state questions, when we poll them, can change literally overnight. We've seen it happen in the past, and it wouldn't surprise me if we see a few of the state questions not go exactly the way we've seen in early polling.
It's good stuff. You'll have good stuff all night long here from the Oklahomans video studio. You can watch online live at newsok.com, the big screen out front. We'll be on all the social media platforms as well, or you can watch on demand at your leisure throughout the night. Big thanks to Rick, to Ben, to Bill. We had Brian Dean and Chris Castile as well earlier. Big thanks to all these gentlemen. Later on tonight, I got to tell you, we have State Senator A.J. Griffin and State Representative Jason Dunnington. They will be joining our cast of thousands here in studio, providing some perspective from their various sides of the fence. So be sure to stick with us throughout the night on newsok.com, as well as updated election results as they come in from the State Election Board. Election night in America. The polls closed about an hour ago. I'm Dave Morris here in the Oklahoman's video studio, and here's what we know so far. Donald Trump projected to win Oklahoma. Chris Castile reports U.S. Representatives Steve Russell and the rest of the guys from our congressional area have all claimed re-election wins tonight here in Oklahoma. I'm joined now on the set, Rick Green, Kelly Fry, Ben Felder from the Oklahoman. Lady and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us, and Bill Schapper from Sooner Poll returns as well. I mentioned that earlier the wins there from our congressional delegation, they will all repeat, and Republican U.S. Senator James Lankford this time will get a 6-year full term this year. Bill, I'm going to start with you at this point. We're starting to see a lot more returns from the various polls. The biggest surprise to you so far?
I think the biggest surprise is the David Bourne 1 cent sales tax is currently underwater. It was in the early voting. It was in the mail-in balloting. I think that many people thought that would pass, and certainly in early polling that we had showed it was. And this is largely because people want teachers to have a pay raise. But when they hear their cities come out and say this really jeopardizes our ability to have a sales tax that funds city services, they become very skeptical. And this is where we begin to see this change, just like we did in 740 6 years ago.
Ben Felder, this is State Question 779 of which he speaks. Was the language confusing to people, perhaps?
Well, I think it was made a little confusing from both sides down the stretch. As Bill said, our polling showed consistent support in the 60s. And we've seen education funding issues in the past show early support and then take that dive. What was noticeable about this one is it was pretty consistent. In a handful of polls, it was in the low 60%. The last poll we had 2 weeks before the election was at 60%. But the last 2 weeks, we also saw a really heavy dose of opposition advertising. And a lot of those ads were raising questions about how much money would be going to teachers versus colleges and career techs.
That was a story you broke down. In fact, you've had various online chats leading up to tonight's results, but election day today, throughout the day. Those were some of the questions that people fielded to you on those chats.
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is that 60% goes to teachers. Opponents were saying that wasn't quite true, and there was some truth to both sides, but you had to explain it in such a way, well, technically this is true, technically this is true. It still kind of is confusing for voters. I spent most of the day talking with voters, and a few that I talked to that brought up this question said that they went in and they just didn't really understand the issue and were going to vote no. Said they were all for increased education funding and higher teacher salaries, but at the end of the day, just didn't know really what to believe on this. So if this one does go down, it looks like the opposition, whether it's coming in the forms of city leaders, lots of municipalities that came out against it, or just the plethora of ads we saw in the final weeks, maybe had done the trick.
I think it also sends a message back to the legislature that people expect them to do something.
Yeah.
They want teachers to get a raise, but they want to put it back on the legislature, and they expect them to govern in that way.
Yeah, and that'll definitely be one of the big post-election storylines. If 779 is defeated, the ball's back in the legislature court.
Rick Green, you follow the state questions. Just for clarification, do state questions tonight just need a majority?
They do. And, it's I think, most effective in advertising on these state questions when it kind of plugs into voters' preconceived notions. And one of those is they don't want to pay a lot of money at the cash register. So when you're talking about a penny per dollar, that's something that inherently could be a tough sell for a lot of people. And I think that could also contribute to, if it is going to go down tonight, to the reason behind it. Conversely, people would like to buy a bottle of wine at the grocery store. Many people would. And a measure to do that allowed the sale of wine, and regular strength beer at supermarkets appears to be passing tonight.
That's state question 792. Two other state questions you're following is 780 and 781. Both of those seem to have a majority at this point.
Right. 780 would reduce from a felony to a misdemeanor many simple drug possession crimes. And 781 would use the money that is saved on reducing the prison population to go toward greater mental health treatment and addiction treatment. Both of those are passing tonight.
Bill, what's another big story you're following? Perhaps Republicans eyeing some seats.
Yeah, I wanted to just add on what Rick said, because I think that 780 and 781 are doing so well. Keep in mind, in the 90s, That was not our mentality. We were wanting to be tough on crime. We wanted truth in sentencing. What did we do in that 20 years? We filled up our prisons. We criminalized addiction. We did things that now I think the public looks at and says, maybe that was the wrong direction. Maybe we need to take a different approach. And so I think that's what we're also seeing in the way Oklahomans are viewing that particular issue as well.
Kelly, I'll throw that your way. This is certainly a subject that you have championed here in this newsroom.
It is, and as we've seen our addiction rates go up, and we've seen overdose deaths go up, people are realizing that addiction and mental illness, those are diseases, and we cannot arrest our way out of this problem. We need to address this problem. So certainly more funding for mental health and substance use maybe can lower the prison population and help us move forward in a more positive way.
She's Kelly Frey. I didn't give her a proper introduction earlier. She's editor of the Oklahoman, Vice President of News and Information here at the Oklahoman. Kelly, can you walk us through what the election coverage is for your newsroom today and then what's happening here tonight?
Well, it is pretty wild because we have people out all over town today talking to people as they exited. We're at watch parties tonight. We have a lot going on. Our newsroom is packed with people scurrying around. We're trying to make our deadlines because we want to make sure you get your paper on time in the morning. We've had a little struggle with that lately.
Deadlines have changed recently, right?
They have. They're a little bit earlier for us, but we have a whole suite of products that we're still offering our customers. So we have the digital replica, and so if you want to log on in the morning, you will see all the latest results of everything and our continuing coverage, because we'll be here well into the night to tell the continuing story of it.
Tonight online at newsok.com, you can find complete results as they are coming in. There are interactive maps you can click on. Our very talented photography staff was out throughout today. They're at the watch parties tonight, so you can see very interesting photo galleries. We mentioned Ben Felder earlier. He was at some of the various polls, but you also spoke with some voters on the south side in the Hispanic community. What were you hearing from them?
Yeah, well, there's a growing Hispanic community on the south side, and one of the things I was interested just kind of get a pulse and a sense for what that community, was thinking this election. Turnout amongst Latino voters nationally, is lower than the national average. It's particularly low here in Oklahoma. There's a variety of reasons for that. A good chunk of Hispanic residents are under the age of 18, so not at voting age yet. You do have a situation where some are undocumented residents, so not eligible to vote. But it did seem like in the weeks leading up, particularly in a few Southside races, that there was an increased effort to get the Hispanic vote out. And in Hispanic issues, immigration kind of became a key talking point in some of these races. Even though immigration may not have much of it, there's not much that the legislature can do at the state level on this topic. We did see some campaign mailer that kind of played up to one side of the issue or the other. In talking with some of the candidates and some of the voters, they said, maybe those were tactics that could have worked in the past, but maybe the demographic was shifting in such where, the message from candidates had to change a bit. But we're definitely seeing an increase in Hispanic voters in South Oklahoma City. We're also seeing a growth in Hispanic residents in Northwest Oklahoma City. And the reality is that this is going to become a factor in Oklahoma politics, and maybe not one that we see a sizable factor today, but in the years to come. And I think one of the main storylines nationally, after when all this said is done, is going to be the Latino vote, which has been growing nationally, and the part it's going to play in some key states when it comes to the presidential race.
Bill, I see you over there crunching some numbers with your phone. What you got?
Yeah, I think just to build on what Ben just said, keep in mind some perspective. 72% of the vote nationwide is white voters. In 1980, Latinos were 2%. Then they were 10% just in 2004. Now they're expected to be 13%. Yes, they're becoming much more of a force. But what we may be seeing more of is that Donald Trump may be getting a larger percentage of the white vote than what we've seen in elections past. Keep in mind that Ronald Reagan and Mitt Romney both got 59% of the white vote. Ronald Reagan won 44 states, and Mitt Romney lost the election 4 years ago. So that shows you the growth within the minority population, the voting population in minorities, is changing the elections. Now, will the Hispanic vote be larger than 13%? That remains to be seen, but still keep in mind that if that white vote can stay at 72, even grow a point because he's bringing out more blue-collar white voters, that's where Donald Trump can do well.
Kelly, I'll give you the last question here. What are you looking forward to tonight, and what would surprise you out of tonight of all the results?
You know, I'm really just trying to make deadline, Dave.
True business lady right there. She is focused.
I am focused on getting good, accurate information. That's what I'm focused on.
We'll be back at 8:30. You can join us at 8:30 and 9 p.m. And joining us will be State Senator A.J. Griffin and State Representative Jason Dunnington. Big thanks to Bill Shafford. I know you got to duck away real fast. He'll be back later tonight as well. Guys, thanks so much. More live coverage on newsok.com throughout the night. Election night in America continues here in the state of Oklahoma and right here in the Oklahomans Video Studio. Dave Morris is the 8:30 version of our election coverage tonight. Thanks so much for tuning in throughout the night. You can watch live on newsok.com or catch the on-demand version as we post each of these live segments later. You can watch on the big screen outside in downtown Oklahoma City at Sheridan and Robinson. You can find results online at newsok.com, including interactive maps, photo galleries, and videos from earlier in the day. Joining me now here live in the studio, Ben Felder from the Oklahoman, and pleased to be joined by Oklahoma Senator A.J. Griffin, State Representative Jason Dunnington. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for your time.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, you two started the day on local radio at KOKC, and you continue the media tour by joining us here at the Oklahoman. How'd it go this morning?
This morning was a lot of fun. I spent from 6 till 9 a.m. this morning hosting that local news program. Had Representative on with me for an hour. Also had Congressman Cole on. We had a great morning. We also visited with the chairman of the Republican Party in the state of Oklahoma, Pam Pollard. So just kind of setting up for the day. Got started before the polls even opened.
Best thing about radio, though, was we didn't have to dress like this.
No.
So.
But you're always dapper. You're always one of the most stylish guys in the city, Jason.
Well, thank you.
What were you hearing this morning on the talk radio? What was the buzz, and how has that perhaps changed throughout the day?
I think there's a lot of optimism on both sides, usually on election morning, and that seemed to be the case this morning. And just talking with colleagues, talking with campaign managers from races in rural Oklahoma all the way into urban Oklahoma. Obviously now results are coming in, and some of the air is getting let out of those balloons. But we'll see how some of these races end up. There are a lot of still really tight races that we're following. So,
does it feel good for you guys to be sitting here versus at a watch party?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Of course, the representative, they're up every other year, but I'm in an off year because we have our odd numbered districts that were up this year in the Oklahoma Senate. So I got to just work on other people's races, which is not quite as stressful as working on.
And
your
no
own.
opponent for you this time.
No opponent this year. So 2 years ago, won by 22 votes, and that was definitely a stressful evening.
Did you go shake those 22 hands?
Yeah.
Well, what are you two watching tonight?
Well, I'm watching the Oklahoma Senate numbers come in. We had 19 races during this cycle, and it looks like our candidates on the Republican side are faring very, very well. But it's interesting. One of our best conversations this morning was about kind of the changing demographic in Oklahoma, how our state kind of lags behind many of the other states in just the way that we shift our population between the urban areas and the rural areas. And I think we're kind of seeing some of that with the numbers that come in. Of those 19 races, 17 of them look like they're solidly going to go to the Republican candidate. But the two that are still in play that we aren't really sure what's going to happen are kind of a sign of the shifting demographic in the state of Oklahoma.
Yeah, definitely paying attention to. We had 11 of our House Democratic caucus members that termed out or decided not to run again. So we had 11 of those seats that we were hoping to protect, and then obviously looking to build on top of that for this evening. So following those 11 races very closely right now. A few have gone our way, which is good, and then still plenty that are too close to call right now. But the hope for House Democrats was to expand on the 30 members that we had, and with the top of the ticket the way that it is, as far as the federal level in Oklahoma, it makes it really difficult for Democrats down ballot. And so how turnout ends up in both rural counties and urban counties will probably be really indicative of whether or not we meet our 30 threshold again and gain, or if we slip back a little bit.
Well, Senator, you talked about that kind of geographical makeup of the legislature right now, and that trend. It seems like the Republicans are growing in the rural areas, and they still have some strongholds in the urban areas, but Representative, you and I have talked about just the Democrats are trying to expand their footprint, especially in Oklahoma City. Mm-hmm. Even though the majorities aren't up for grabs, I mean, this is going to be a Republican-controlled, a supermajority for the Republicans going into the next session. How does that shift in which districts are represented? How does that influence what takes place at the Capitol, do you think, with Republicans having that kind of suburban, rural base versus urban base for Democrats?
I think one of the big differences it'll make is when you see cities like the city of Oklahoma City and city of Tulsa, as they start to look at
what's going on in the legislature and how it affects the cities. A lot of these preemption type bills that have been passed through in years prior to this, I think you'll start to see the cities then lean on more of that Democrat kind of majority in the urban areas to see if they can't walk some of those things back. So, you know, in some ways, the city's working in tandem with the more Democratic caucus members that are that hold majority of the seats in those urban areas. I think you could see that. I mean, we already have, as with State Question 777, I think there was an article today in the Oklahoman about this, you know, rural-urban divide and how it's playing out on that question in particular. And I think, you know, we'll likely see more of that moving forward.
And in other areas, of course, the hottest topic of our conversation this year has been education. And part of the issues that we've had in education is reforms that were based around the needs of the urban area, but not necessarily meeting the needs of the rural area of the state. So this should set us up to have, for the first time, some actually genuine conversations about the needs of all Oklahoma schools, and not necessarily some of these policies of the past where we were pitting the urban schools versus the rural schools when it came to funding and policy and those types of things. So hopefully it's a shift kind of in the right direction, and we will begin to have the conversations around education that we really need to have.
Yeah. Well, races for Republicans are kind of, you know, circled as an attempted flip, and for the Democrats as well. What are each party's eyeing right now?
We've certainly eyed a number of seats here in the Oklahoma City area. So House District 87, that was formerly Representative Nelson's, was one that we've really spent a lot of time and energy on. House District 93 on the south side, formerly Representative Christians, is another that we've targeted as one that we think that we could pick up tonight.
And I'll butt in right there. State Rep District 93, Mickey Dollins, 56% at this point.
Okay, great. So that's good as far as energy that we've put in to pick up in more urban areas. So we obviously following our colleague closely tonight, House District 85 in the Cindy Munson race. Before we came on here, she looked like she had a pretty steady lead.
She's at 54% roughly.
Okay, in that seat. So. And maybe for the viewer, you know, they think, you know, 54, 55%, it sounds so close. I mean, in our world of politics, I mean, if you're at this stage in the evening and you have 54%, you're pretty happy. Yeah. So that's a good thing. Those are the two of the kind of targets that we've had here just locally.
Well, and we had, of course, holding the two seats in Little Dixie in the southeastern area of the state with the Senator Boggs and Senator Silk, trying to hang on to those two seats that are not traditionally in our hands at all. Of course, targeted the seat in Ada that was vacated when Susan Paddock term lifted out, and it looks like that one is well in hand by Greg McCourtney. He's doing very well there. And then there were two seats we had hoped to look at picking up in the northeastern.
62%.
Yeah, McCourtney's doing very well. And then in the northeastern area of the state, two that we are not traditionally our seats as well, that were vacated by Senator Charlie Wyrick and term limited by Senator Earl Garrison. One of those looks really good. The other one's still kind of in play. Then, of course, we're seeing the shifting demographic in the Tulsa area, and two seats, the Newberry seat, which is always a marginal seat. Senator Newberry has to work really hard to hang on to that one. And
52%
then, of course,
at this point.
We had the open seat vacated when Senator Crane term limited, that Dave Rader's in that seat as well. So looking at that one, it looks pretty close on that one. I don't know that we're going to hang on to that one, so we may actually drop a seat.
Boy, that is close at this point, within 200 votes, 50 to 49%.
And that one's one where you had a Tulsa teacher who's running for that Senate seat as the Democrat, John Waldron.
Yeah. In the midtown area of Tulsa that has a big shift in the demographics. You know, it's a little bit like the midtown area of Oklahoma City, where the average age and population has dropped considerably since redistricting. So I think as we approach the time when we'll redistrict, we'll begin to see those shifts. They'll play out now, and then of course again in 2018 when we go through that cycle, we'll see that shift again.
Yeah. I just got an update for some friends. It looks like that we've held on to the House District 92 seat, so that'd be Forrest Bennett replacing the outgoing Representative Morset. And that race got very contentious here in the last week or two. A lot of negative mail that came from the Republican side of that race. and really peeled off numbers here. So it was one that we had some angst about this morning, but it looks like that we've pulled that seat out. And
Forrest Bennett sitting at about 61%, but again, total votes cast 581 at this point.
Yeah.
Still early.
Yeah.
It's early
Well,
in the
you
evening.
talked about, I know you were eyeing the Senate. One of the things interesting to me is on the House is the eastern part of the state. Because we've got, I was circling before we went on here, a handful of seats, 6 or 7 Democratic-controlled seats right now that are open races without an incumbent. Talk about the opening that provides when you have a seat. I mean, the power of the incumbency is pretty large in Oklahoma, but when you have an open seat, it seems like it provides an opportunity for the minority party to step in, right?
It definitely provides an opportunity, and we'll see kind of a look at other numbers after this cycle's finished today. But one of the things on many of the House races is there was quite a significant amount of money spent in some of these House seats, both from candidates and then from outside groups that were spending money, and a lot of that was chasing that open seat just because there were so many of them this year. And when they're clustered like that, especially in eastern rural Oklahoma, there is a general sense that if you could get momentum in 1 or 2, you might be able to sweep 3 or 4 or 5 of them. So it was something that we were definitely paying attention to out there. And then you have the contentious House District 2 race that Representative Bennett has, certainly put his name in the both local and national media here recently on a number of different issues. And that race still hasn't been called. So
We'll really start to see the impact of term limits. This is the first cycle, and then of course when we go through the 18 cycle, whenever we begin to have elected officials that start and end their career under term limits. So that forced turnover will cause us to kind of shift things around a little bit, and it does provide opportunities for the minority party, I think, that would not exist otherwise.
Yeah.
Did you guys decide you would sit on the right, he would sit on the left when you guys joined us here on the news desk, or it just worked out that way?
We do this a lot. You also notice he's wearing blue and I'm wearing red, so.
There you go.
As you might guess, the Republican and the Democrat State Senator A.J. Griffin representing District 20, and State Representative Jason Dunnington, District 88, I believe, correct? Guys, thanks so much for sitting in. Ben Feller from the Oklahoman as well. We'll be back at 9 p.m. with another live update. One thing Oklahoma declared for Donald Trump, and one of the storylines we were following tonight is, would he win all 77 counties? And at this point, that appears to be the case. Hillary Clinton topping 40%, as our Chris Castile reports, only in Cleveland, Oklahoma, and Tulsa counties. We'll be back at 9 p.m. Thanks for tuning in. Election night in America continues, including our election coverage from the Oklahomans Video Studio. Good evening, I'm Dave Morris. It's the 9 p.m. version of our election updates, which we will continue throughout the night. I'm joined on the set now with Ben Felder from the Oklahoman, and we are pleased to be joined with our guests who have returned for yet another segment. State Representative Jason Dunnington, Democrat representing District 88, and State Senator A.J. Griffin representing District 20. Guys, thanks so much for spending the night with us and sitting in for another segment.
Absolutely.
We're seeing some of the results come in from the state questions. I'm going to lead off with state question 779. That was the 1% sales tax, which has failed tonight. Our Juliana Keeping was there, and she filed a video from OU President David Boren, who had the following to say.
Until they come up with a different plan to get the teachers a raise and to help the children of the state of Oklahoma. So tonight we just said to ourselves, we've started the conversation. The conversation isn't over. We're not going to stop until we adequately invest in the next generation of young Oklahomans. We're going to win the ultimate battle when it comes back to the state capitol to be decided. Thank you all very much for being here.
Tonight they chose not to do it this way. I think their hope is that the legislature, which has been saying, let us do it instead. Now it's up to them to come up with a plan and get the job done. So there's nothing magic about it. I don't have any particular attachment to one method or another. The important thing is that we take care of our children and we educate the next generation. How we do it is not important. The important thing is to meet that goal.
Representative Dunnington, looks like he threw it back at the legislature. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the legislature definitely needs to get to work. I mean, if the people of Oklahoma have decided that a voluntary 1 penny sales tax isn't going to be the way to get funding into education, then we're going to have to. I mean, we continue to lose teachers to our neighboring states and continue to lose young people at the university level that are no longer looking at education as a viable profession. Yet we still have a growing number of young people in our state, including my children, who are both in Oklahoma City Public Schools. And we'll, as a legislature, need to figure out a way to work together in order to find the will to get teacher pay raises.
In today's editions of the Oklahoman, our Ben Felder had 16 storylines to follow. And Ben, that was one of your storylines, was there are various teachers running for races and how they would fare tonight. But that's one of the storylines you're following.
Was the state question or the teachers?
Well, the teachers that are involved in various races.
Yeah, I mean, education is a big theme, both because of the state question and because of the so-called teachers caucus. I counted, it's kind of, the numbers kind of fluctuated, but I've counted 31 current or former educators that are running for office on a public school-centric campaign. Now, 3 seemed that they were going to be likely winners, and I don't have those results in front of me, but the rest were competing in districts that their party they represented, it didn't seem too competitive for them. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see. We saw 779 has been defeated. We're not expecting necessarily dozens of these education candidates to be elected, but even maybe a handful, 3 or 4, could put a bigger spotlight on education, especially as now it seems like education funding and teacher pay raise will at least be a topic of discussion once again in the session. I think the thing that's interesting to me is I think back, and we just saw the clip from President Boren, is I remember about a year ago it was when this effort was kicked off. It seemed like when Boren made the initial press conference about this, about 779, was that it was talked about as, hey, this isn't the best idea, but it's the only idea, almost as a way to try to nudge the legislature to maybe come up with a better plan. And when a plan didn't emerge from the Capitol this session, it seemed like the supporters of 779 had to shift that message to be like, this is the best plan. It's the only plan, but this is the best plan. And so here we are once again a year later with President Boren saying, hey, we really need our lawmakers to do something about that. I'm kind of curious, Representative, you kind of spoke about this, but this was a big issue already last year. Is it an even bigger issue this year? And we know that budget is going to be a concern again next session. I mean, what are
your early, minutes after this has been defeated, your assessments on what can we expect, do you think, out of the legislature next session on this issue of education funding and teacher pay?
As one of the few former teachers that's already in the legislature, the one thing I want to make sure, if there's any teachers that are listening, don't be disheartened. I don't think it's an indication of the value you have in the state of Oklahoma at all. So our teachers need to know that we're going to roll up our sleeves and try to come up with a plan. My constituents, I heard pretty consistently, they didn't like the permanency of putting a tax into the Constitution, and they also didn't like necessarily the aspect that it was an across the board. So there was no quality involved in that, so that the talented teachers that we have that we're really concerned about keeping in the state weren't necessarily going to benefit more than some of the other teachers. And so I think if we can focus on rewarding our excellent teachers and listen to them, and I think that's probably, as a representative of my district, the thing I want to do is make sure I go back and say, okay, this didn't work, but tell me what you guys need, tell us how you want us to do it. Then we have to go find the money. And that's part of the job of having the power of the purse, is that when there's not a lot of coins in that purse, we've got to go scrounge them out of the couch and everywhere else we can find them.
Yeah, I think just overall, I think the education community is going to feel very disheartened and let down this evening, and I think that it'll be very important for us at the legislative level to have a unified voice on the fact that we will get something done in order to start righting this ship. It's obviously a problem in Oklahoma. It has certainly a part of it has to do with funding, but I think that there are other problems that the legislative kind of work groups that were working last year found that can be done. I've worked with a good friend of mine and colleague, Representative Rogers from Tulsa, and he played a pretty big role in the Common Education Committee last year. I think he'll play an even bigger role this year under the new McCall speakership. And I think that he's someone that has a lot of great ideas. And again, I think it's one of those times where we as Oklahomans really need to pull together and figure out a pathway forward. Because going through another complete legislative session of just saying we're going to try and fix it without getting anything done just won't be acceptable.
Well, the other thing to remember too is that when we have conversations about the state budget or about finance in general and stabilizing our state revenues, that is a conversation about education. We don't just have to be talking about teacher pay raises. And those are the serious conversations that I think we're prepared to get after. We've got to talk about revenue stabilization and modernization. We are using a tax code that, quite frankly, is pretty antiquated.
Senator Griffin, another one of Ben's storylines in today's editions of the Oklahoman was, will Democrats gain any seats in Oklahoma, or will Republicans increase their lead? And judging from your reaction as you look at your phone, you're pleased with tonight.
Well, I'm actually a little bit taken aback. I did not expect us to run the table and the 19 seats that were up for grabs in the Senate, and it looks like that's what's going to happen. So we'll grow our caucus to a 42 majority out of 48. Didn't expect that. I thought that we might pick up one or two and net, but it looks like we're going to run the table. With that comes some unique challenges. It certainly does, because regardless of the numbers and the parties, the makeup of the legislature, when you really look, actually does reflect the state of Oklahoma. So this is 42 Republicans that will not be homogeneous by any stretch of the imagination.
Representative Dunnington, any surprises that you've seen tonight?
I think I'm a little surprised that Democrats didn't hold some of the seats that were open seats. I think in a climate where we've had 3 and 4 years now in a row of budget deficits, where we're looking at, quite possibly another $1 billion deficit next year, there is that part of you that thinks, are we going to keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result, or are we going to do something different? And of course, we had hoped that tonight might be the first step in that process of doing something different. If we end up here at the end of the night picking up a few of these urban seats that I talked about earlier, I think that could be, the first kind of positive light that we could look into what might look like something different. But it's obviously going to take a while. It's going to take many more years before Democrats begin to start building seats back. But I will say on that, the old adage of, I think it's with great power comes great responsibility, and with the Republican supermajority in both the House and the Senate, again, if we get through another legislative session and we don't have anything of substance to look back on, then at some point I believe that the voters in Oklahoma are going to have to recognize that it is the people that they're sending to the Capitol that are causing some of the problem. I have a great relationship with colleagues across the aisle, have great respect for them, especially for Senator Griffin, and I think that there will be those kind of conversations this next year, and I have to have hope for that. Otherwise, as a Democrat in Oklahoma, there's not a lot to be hopeful for right now.
We mentioned we're on the education topic here. Our Tim Willard reporting the Oklahoma City Public Schools bond package continues to pass, and that needs a 60% majority to do so. It's currently trending in that area. Ben, we had Kelly Fry, our boss, on earlier tonight, the editor of the Oklahoman. She mentioned she's focused on deadlines. You have filed your story for Deadline. And what was your storyline? What did you write?
Well, I was going into the night, as we've already talked about, kind of looking at what the geographical makeup of the state legislature is going to be. This trend that we've seen over the last several years of the Republican Party becoming more of a rural and suburban party, Democrats looking to expand their footprints in the urban areas, which is a flip of where things have been. And really, we just saw the continuation of that. A lot of these rural seats that Democrats have had in control have moved over to the Republican column. It seems like the Democrats are going to pick up a few urban seats, and as Representative Dunnington said, that has to be kind of the point of celebration for Democrats. There was no opportunity here. No one was under the illusions that Democrats were going to compete for the majority in either the Senate or House, and it may have gone in the opposite direction on that front. But we continue to see this divide, and it's not just in Oklahoma, it's nationally. When you look at that presidential map that shows all the counties or the precincts, it's really red with dots of blue, but those dots of blue are the urban areas of the nation. And so that's a reality that we're facing right now as a country, and it looks like that's kind of the political reality in Oklahoma as well.
One of your colleagues was at the Hillary Clinton watch party tonight. That was reporter Darla Slipke, and she filed the following video earlier tonight from that watch party.
Tonight is everyone's really excited to be supported by fellow Democrats here in Oklahoma. Everyone is also a little bit nervous. We're hoping our candidate pulls this out. There is just a sense of camaraderie and support and encouragement and empowerment inside this watch party that is atypical of most watch parties I've been to, and it's really encouraging and it's lovely. I think one of the biggest things that I would love for tomorrow, regardless of which candidate wins, is that we've started a conversation here in Oklahoma and across our nation. And I hope that we can heal the wounds that we've opened, that we don't make them any more divisive, that we make sure that we love each other, and that is something that's really important to me, that we come together tomorrow just as a united nation.
It looks like Republican candidate Donald Trump will win all 77 counties in Oklahoma. We'll wrap it up for this segment from the Oklahoman's video studio. I have to say a big thanks to Senator Griffin and Representative Dunnington. I really do appreciate your time tonight. What's the rest of your night look like? I know your night's not done at this point. Senator?
Time to celebrate, and then I'll be on the air bright and early at 6 o'clock in the morning on KOKC, and we'll be talking to Attorney General Pruitt and then several of the winners, and then breaking it down with Clark Jolly.
Oh, look out.
Former Senator Clark Jolly.
All right, Representative?
I'll probably make an appearance over at the no side of the campaign on State Question 777. It's an issue that for 2 years that I've worked diligently on the no side, and so I'll probably step over to that watch party and congratulate a few folks that have worked very diligently on that race, and then I'll look to see if I can't find a couple of my Democratic colleagues around here somewhere in the city, and continue to watch the results on the national level. I've got a little girl at home, a little 7-year-old daughter, and she was excited this morning, telling me that she could have someone that looks like her as the next president. So I'll anxiously await with my colleagues to see how that race pulls out, and then I hope to have good news to tell my daughter in the morning that indeed she will have a female as the President of the United States.
Good stuff, guys. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it. More election coverage can be found on newsok.com throughout the night. We'll be back shortly. Gotta love the election music. Election night. The United States and various candidates and issues in those races across the states and here locally. I'm Dave Morris here in the Oklahomans Video Studio. Thanks so much for tuning in throughout Tuesday evening. You can watch all the video updates that we recorded tonight on demand, and thanks so much for tuning in on those. You can find all the results for all the counties and all the races on newsok.com as well. Photo galleries and various videos from your fellow neighbors as they commented on the various races. Let's get to a few of the results today. In Oklahoma, the Republican Donald Trump for presidential candidate picked up the state's 7 electoral votes. U.S. Representatives Steve Russell, Tom Cole, Frank Lucas, and Markwayne Mullen won new terms. U.S. Representative Jim Bridenstine was reelected in the GOP primary. Republican U.S. Senator James Lankford captured a full 6-year term. He had been serving the last 2 years of former Senator Tom Coburn's term. Looks like it's going to be a clean sweep for Republicans in the state Senate. They won 19 seats tonight. They will hold a 42-6 majority next year. It was 39-9. Among the state questions, 790, the religion removal from the Constitution. State question 777, the right to farm. State question 779, the 1% sales tax. Those state questions failed. The ones that passed, state question 776, the death penalty measure. 792, the liquor law. And 780, 781, the criminal justice reform measures passed. I will be joined shortly by Ben Felder and Rick Green to look at those, and perhaps interesting to look at the down ballot result for the Republicans. And I'll bring you gentlemen in at this point. You've joined us all night long. Thank you very much for your time. Rick Green, Ben Felder from the Oklahoman, Chris Castile joins us via Skype from Washington, D.C. And Rick, I'll talk with you first. An interesting night for the state questions and perhaps an interesting night to see the down ballot results for the Republicans.
Big victory for the Republicans all across the board, and it shows some surprising results in terms of the penny sales tax, which is something that seemed to have some support earlier in the campaign, and some polling seemed to show that people wanted to give teachers a raise and were willing to pay a penny per dollar to do so. A lot of money came in toward the end, and that just went down in flames. So that was a little bit surprising.
Rick, do you think perhaps those are the two storylines tonight, the Republicans having a big night and then polling, maybe nationally and locally, not being what we thought?
I think so, because certainly we're seeing on the national front, it's extremely tight in a race where there was some talk of even a Democratic wave. And that superiority of the GOP on the national front is being played out on the state level as well, and we're seeing it in the state legislature.
Ben, what did you see tonight?
Well, as Rick said, it's been a big night for Republicans, and they already hold quite a big lead in the State House and State Senate, and they just added to their leads. It was a clean sweep in all 19 State Senate races for Republicans. They had a chance to pick up 3 seats, and they did. They increased their majority in the Senate, and they also increased their majority in the House. And as it stands right now, the Republican majority in the State House is 76-25. However, we have 2 races that are too close to call right now. And one in particular, House District 87, it's a seat here in Oklahoma City. That's the one that's held by Representative Jason Nelson, who's outgoing. This is a race between Waukee, the Democrat, Smith, the Republican, and a Libertarian candidate. That's an important one because picking up that seat for Democrats would knock the majority down to 75 for Republicans. And why that's important is because that would put them below the threshold of a true supermajority that would allow them to raise taxes and fees. Now, that's with the caveat that all 76 members would vote for something like that. But that's still a threshold that right now is in the balance, whether Republicans are going to have that true supermajority when it comes to increasing taxes, which they're not quick to do, obviously, or if they'll be at 75. But either way, lots of pickups. Democrats were able to pick up flip one seat. That was a South Oklahoma City seat that flipped to blue. Before tonight, I had circled 7 seats in eastern Oklahoma that were all in Democratic control that I thought could be dangerous or could be possible pickups for Republicans for a couple of reasons. One, Trump did very well there, and 2, Republicans were outspending their Democratic opponents by quite a bit, and they picked up nearly all of them.
Chris Castile from Washington, D.C. on Skype. Let's bring you in for some national perspective on what we've seen tonight.
Okay. Not much surprise in Oklahoma, of course. Donald Trump won it big. As we were talking beforehand, it looks, with most of the vote counted, Clinton has 29%. And I think, just from some quick looking that I was doing that, it may be the lowest since 1972 when Richard Nixon beat George McGovern. Even you talk about people that really got blown out in Oklahoma in presidential races. Dukakis, Michael Dukakis in '88 by Bush, Walter Mondale in '84 by Reagan. Even those two Democrats got more than Hillary Clinton did tonight. So and all of the incumbents on the congressional delegation that were up tonight, one huge. Senator Langford, as you mentioned, won a full 6-year term, and the 4 Republican congressmen that were on the ballot all won with really big margins. So, a big Republican night. I was interested in what Ben and Rick were talking about, because you've got the last 2 years of Mary Fallon's time as governor, and she's just changed her chief of staff. She's got huge majorities to work with. It would seem like this would be her. She's got the means to accomplish what she might want to be her legacy of the next 2 years.
Rick, Ben, I'll throw it to you. Your thoughts on what Chris is saying there, looking ahead to Governor Mary Fallon's final 2 years?
Yeah, that would be the presumption, that she would find a way now to build something of a legacy. And I know she's very concerned, or she's expressed concerns about education and health, but both of those things require funding and money. And that's not something that is forthcoming from a very conservative legislature. So we'll see if she does get a supermajority in the House, and whether that could result in something like a tobacco tax to fund some of these initiatives. That's something that she wants. So it will be interesting to see. And I don't know if from your perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, remember, the legislature wasn't able to put forward a teacher pay raise plan. There were some talks of some, but it never really got out of committee. And then when they had the, not the surplus, but the returned funds after they kind of overshot the budget deficit, Fallon immediately came out and she said she wanted to take some of that money and hold a special session this fall and put it towards a teacher pay raise plan. And nobody, it seemed like, in the House or Senate was even keen to that idea. But one thing will be interesting to see now in the next few months up to session is, are we going to see some detailed plans? We've seen Senator David Holt had a plan that had a $10,000 teacher raise and some other things. And like I said, Fallon had pitched that special session. So right now it's kind of, the ball's in their court, especially since the majority of Republicans who were against the sales tax have been saying there's a better way to do it, and that better way is to let us do it in the legislature. Well, they kind of got what they asked for.
And it kind of seems like the one thing that has gone a little bit differently than thought was State Question 790, the use of public money for religious purposes. And that's a provision of the state constitution, and there was an effort to change that, to remove that from the Constitution. It was
from the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, and that has to do with the Ten Commandments. It's the reason the court gave for removing the Ten Commandments from the state capital property. And so this was put in the ballot, and in a very conservative state, a very religious state, I think a lot of people thought it might pass. This, what some people call it, a relic of anti-religiousness in our Constitution, would be removed. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
What was just out of curiosity, what arguments did the opposition use against that? Was it school-based? School choice?
I don't
with
know
the Ten Commandments.
There wasn't a lot of organized opposition that I saw.
No, there really wasn't. And when I talked to even people in the religious community, they felt like the issue was kind of confusing, and a lot of them were just kind of default going to vote no. The school voucher argument was made by some, saying that this might be an open door. But earlier this year, the state Supreme Court upheld the Lindsay Nicole scholarship, which is a form of school vouchers for children with disabilities. So it seemed to me that the state has already kind of opened the door to that. I'm not sure that was necessary,
I think you said it best with confusing.
Yeah.
Because the conventional wisdom is, if you're confused by a ballot measure, just vote no. Mm-hmm. And right in the ballot title, it said that there is a provision in the U.S. Constitution about religion, and that protection will continue to be there, the Establishment Clause. And so a lot of people might thought, well, if that's in there, why do we even need to do this?
Yeah.
Big election night in America and in Oklahoma. Chris, let me ask you this. You're in Washington, D.C. tonight. You've covered numerous elections, numerous presidential elections, and perhaps you're covering one for the final time for us here at the Oklahoman. Your thoughts on tonight and what you're seeing? Unusual? Have you seen stuff like this before, or?
No. I really can't remember one where, the polling, the expectations were so wrong. The confidence exuded by the Democrats in the last few days, just led you to believe, because even if you don't go by the public polling, the networks polling, you kind of think that candidates have internal polling that's really reliable, and that they wouldn't act real confident about Florida or Michigan or Ohio, whatever state it might be, if they didn't know. And I think the candidates themselves are probably stunned by this. I mean, the polling of both of the internal polling by both those candidates must have been off as well. So it has really been a surprising night, and it looks, at least right now, like the Republicans will control both houses of Congress again too. So you may have a Republican president and a Republican Congress. It's still early. I mean, a lot could happen, but I'm just saying that's a possibility that no one was really talking about Monday. At this time on Monday.
I should mention our Rick Green is on deadline. He has left the set to tend to some deadline matters. But Ben and Chris, I have a question for you. Earlier tonight, we had State Senator A.J. Griffin. She joined us, and she was talking about the Republicans winning. But she mentioned to me, Dave, the profile of candidate has changed. And you mentioned, Chris, Republicans perhaps winning majority, both houses of Congress, perhaps president, locally winning big. Is it a different type of Republican that we're seeing with these wins?
Well, I think the quick answer for Oklahoma, and maybe this applies nationally in some regards, is it kind of depends on the geography. Representative Dunnington for the Democrats, who was with us, said that Democrats were kind of losing some seats but gaining in the urban areas. That's going to change the complexion of the Democratic Party to maybe a more progressive party. And I think on the flip side for Republicans, definitely picking up some of these rural seats. Like I said, these were in places where Trump did really well. These are also, hard economic times, very high social conservative values that rank pretty high for these voters. But I think your Republican lawmaker that won election in eastern Oklahoma is probably going to think a little differently on some things than your Northwest Oklahoma City Republican or your Edmond Republican. And it really seems to kind of depend on geography. That's why I say that even if the Republicans come out with that 76-member supermajority, it's very unlikely we're going to see complicated financial votes, with a unanimous vote from the Republicans. So there's still going to be some challenges within the Capitol. I mean, they had a large majority last year, and there were still some hurdles that they ran into in facing some serious issues. But that's how I see it on the state. I'm not sure how Chris sees it on the national level here.
Chris, your thoughts?
Well, I think nationally, Dave and Ben, that what we're seeing on the Senate is mostly incumbents being reelected. So, and I don't know, that we could call them a different kind of Republican if they're already in Congress. But clearly, Donald Trump is a different kind of Republican, and some might argue he's not really a Republican, although he's taken very Republican stances on things like guns and abortion and Obamacare. But on trade, that's not the position he's taken on trade is not very Republican. I'm not sure what segment of the Republican establishment that he represents on immigration. I don't think it's a very big segment of the Republican establishment. So yes, he's definitely a new kind of Republican.
Chris, let me ask you this. We kind of foreshadowed this earlier in the evening and in this segment. You will be moving on from the Oklahoman here in a few weeks to pursue some other matters. Will you miss election night coverage?
Well, we'll just have to wait and see. We'll wait in a couple of years and see. For the last few years, it just hasn't been competitive in Oklahoma. And so that's not interesting, to me. If I were back there, covering some of the things that Ben and Rick have been covering, something I could get my teeth into a little more, that'd be different. But, the fact that, these congressional races have just become, this whatever Republican comes out of the primary is guaranteed the seat. I mean, that's just not interesting. So, it's just been a while. I mean, 2014, the primary to replace Tom Coburn was interesting for a while. Langford wound up winning that big over T.W. Shannon, and then that was basically settled. So, to answer your question, probably not, given the circumstances.
That whole answer sums up your reporting, sir. It's good sides, both sides of the fence, some analysis, and then a conclusion said concisely. Chris, we've always appreciated your reporting, and I've certainly appreciated your help over the years with our video coverage of all things political. So thank you, sir, for that.
All right, glad to do it, Dave.
And thank you tonight, Ben Felder. Thanks for your work tonight, for joining us all throughout the night on set. Good analysis and perspective. You mentioned that you're done with your print deadlines. You're working on some web deadlines. What does that mean, and what will you be doing for the rest of the night?
Well, web deadline means there is no deadline, so we'll be here throughout the evening and early morning and tomorrow just to kind of see how things shake out. I mean, that goes for all races. Of course, we'll have the results at News OK from presidential on down. But yeah, we're going to follow these. We're still waiting on one precinct in House District 87, which is kind of that swing seat right now. It's a Republican seat that looks like it could be leaning towards the Democrats. So that's an interesting one here in Oklahoma City. And so not sure what the holdup is on that last precinct. Hearing a little bit of rumors. It's not confirmed, but there may be some issues, that there may be some double checking on some numbers or a recount in one precinct. Not sure about that, but as long as it takes, we'll be here. And we'll be now the real fun begins in some ways, because now you kind of get to analyze the results and kind of see what the road forward looks like.
The conversation just continues, right? All right, Ben, thank you for your time. Much appreciated. Big thanks to Bill Shepard from Sooner Poll for joining us earlier tonight. For Brian Dean from the State Election Board for his time. Also to State Senator A.J. Griffin and State Representative Jason Dunnington. They joined us for a couple of segments. You can watch those online at newsok.com. We certainly appreciate them spending an hour with us. Big thanks to Phil O'Connor, Tiffany Gibson for their help behind the scenes producing tonight, and to the video team, Paige Dillard, Todd Frazier, Greg Singleton, Grayson Cook, and Tim Money. Big thanks to them. Election night in America has been mentioned. The coverage continues online at newsok.com. You can watch these videos online. Thanks for tuning in, and continuing coverage can be found in the Oklahoman. Be sure to go to your driveways and newsstands for that, and of course online at newsok.com.